Worship, Jaya, Police, Adel, Amrit, Wazir, and Jay. I'd like to remind everyone that if you like to exit the call, please do so in teachers. Please silence your phones. If your phone vibrates or loudly, off your phone. With the motion that this House respects the rise of alteration products and services targeted to alter one's skin, I call upon the first speaker, Prime Minister. Here. The time people will be Jaya.
Test, test. Do you want to touch the mic now then? Do it. Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the plot line of any advertisement of alteration products is very predictable. It features a dark-skinned woman walking in a rainy, gloomy day, looking down and miserable. But when the skin-altering product is used or applied, the tone becomes her walking on sunshine and receiving better treatment from everyone around her. What's even worse is that with the rise of these products, people have begun internalizing the discrimination that they face and go to the extent of opting out of their own race, opting out of their own culture because the society pressured, right? This is because of the rise of these products that make them, that association of life will be better if they change their skin to fit those who are in privilege right now. We think that all they're doing come from their side is perpetuating this type of culture. 3 points of context. Firstly, the rise of alteration products and services that change to alter one's skin, things like, for example, Glutamax, or even going to the extent of bleaching your own skin, like, for example, what Michael Jackson did, is summarized with the increasing market and trend for these products. That more people are opting into these products, more people feel like they should be able to do so, and the societal pressure. We think that this is presented in a way that lighter is better and darker is worse in most cases, right? We think that what it does is says that skin is a determinant factor of privilege and better treatment with the way these ads are presented. Secondly, this culture is extremely coercive, have a seat, and influential to the point that people feel like inferior beings, right? We think that what this does is perpetuates beauty standards that says in general the way that these advertisements are made is that lighter is better and darker is worse. Thirdly, this culture not only pressures people, but it sets back agendas we have already had to promote equality, the fight against racism, the fight against any sort of bodily restriction that restricts people from doing whatever they want, that your race or skin should not set you back. We have to make it clear, our burden in this debate is not to solve racism. This debate is about comparatives. Under which side is going to be able to entrench that culture of racism even further and legitimize it. And we think that's worse off on their side under these two arguments. Why? Firstly, I'm going to talk about why exactly their side preserves and entrenches a culture where you are valued based on your skin. No, thank you. What's the ideal world? The ideal world is one where you are not restricted by your body politically, economically, or culturally. It is unfair that people are born into worse conditions that they have no control over simply because they are from a certain race or born into a certain body. It's the idea of birth lottery, that you're automatically put into a worse off position than other people because you're from a certain race or because you're from a certain culture. We have to realize it's extremely, extremely diverse and extremely, extremely unfair. The culture right now is very simple. We are breaking those bodily barriers with so many campaigns against things like racism. It's been a social trend that tries as much as possible to say that your race should not be identified with a certain trait. Your race should not determine how exactly people ought to be able to treat you. Why does their side worsen that culture even more and reverse those trends? We think that it is worsened when you recognize that there is and should be a drastic difference between how you should treat a light person person and a dark person. That society will treat you differently. You should expect different from yourself simply because you opt into these different types of products to begin with. Mr. Speaker, or whoever the chair is, right? We think that these social expectations translate into reality and vice versa, meaning that what they have coming from their side is just a circular trend which says that social expectations translate into reality, reality becomes those social expectations, it's just perpetuated even more. It creates this whole entire very, very malicious cycle, right? So what exactly is the even if in this argument, right? We say that in general, right, if what they want to be able to say is that people have bodily autonomy, control over their bodies, we think that principle is only important insofar as society says that we should treat you differently because of your body. We should treat you differently because of the color of your skin. So we think that the whole entire idea and that principle of bodily autonomy only matters insofar as people value your actual skin to begin with. What we're trying to do coming from their side is to completely destroy that as a standard and completely say that it's wrong. So what exactly is the importance in this argument and what is the conclusion, right? We think that their side entrenches a culture where you are valued based on your skin simply because of this whole entire idea that the culture right now tries to break those bodily barriers. What they're trying to be able to do is say it's totally legitimate for you to advertise these products and say it's totally better for you to be light-skinned. It's totally better for you to opt out of your different cultures or different culture that you were born into. We think that's totally regrettable. Second argument, I'm going to talk about why the rise of this culture is coercive to pressure people to not feel comfortable in their skin. Before I move on, any points?
So would you guys be happy with people changing their religion?
No, that's totally different coming from our side because there are different social expectations to what your religion is. There are different sorts of traits that people associate with religion. We're talking about race here. Don't try to veer the debate away from what it should be. Second argument, I'll talk about why the rise of this culture is coercive to pressure people to not feel comfortable in their skin, right? The premise here is simple. We think that the underlying principle of opposition may be choice. But we say that in a world where this culture, the choices you give one either to stay with your horrible culture that society says is totally regrettable or totally ugly, or to change to a more glamorous and happy life of being white or being lighter, right, is generally something that we should be able to regret. The analysis here is very simple. We think that this comparative is that their world is coercive in many ways. It may be from TV ads who deliberately portray life with white skin as happier, where they target racial minorities with these different types of, for example, darker skin or with certain skins that are not treated as well in society, right? It can be in your community, for example, with your friends that are growing up, right? To grow in an environment thinking that you are inferior because it's a trend that everyone else is going to be able to do. They're going to pressure you to be able to opt into these different types of products and services to begin with. So we say that the right and the principle of bodily autonomy is only important insofar as society treats you differently because of your body. But that's not the society that we want. That's not the ideal world that we are able to bring you at the start of this debate. We think that people would not even care about your looks because the idea of opting out only matters insofar as society thinks and actually believes in the value of your whole entire body, that your body should define who you are and how people should be able to treat you. So what exactly is the exclusive thing coming from our side, right? The exclusive principle here is extremely simple. We want to break any sort of mechanisms that you find in society that try as much as possible to perpetuate ideas of racism. That it's this idea that you're restricted to your body. That's the exclusive core principle that we have coming from our side, that their side is never going to have if they tolerate these different types of advertisements, if they tolerate the perpetuate, like the markets in which these products and services are going to be sold under and are going to be perpetuated under. At the end of the day, this debate is extremely simple. We have a culture of racism right now that we are winning against, right? And if what their side wants to do is to perpetuate that racism even further and say it's totally fine for you to treat someone differently based on your race and skin, and therefore you should opt out of your current race or skin, is generally something that's regrettable. And that's the reason as to why side affirmative is going to win this debate and win ASDC 2016. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll start the case of the opposition. Call upon the first speaker, the opposition. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, we allow people to do a wide variety of things with their bodies and with themselves. We allow them to go for breast enlargement surgery. We allow them to change the way their face structure looks. We allow them to change things as integral to their identity as religion. I don't understand, and none of these people have proven, why race is fundamentally different from these things that we suggest. That is why we oppose. I want to talk about 4 broad things. 1, why we think organic change can't happen and why it can't solve racism. 2, when do we stop choices and why doesn't this cohere? 3, why is it especially important to protect such choice because of identity? 4, why is it important for us to allow people to escape discrimination? So 1, on organic change and solving racism. PM caveats that his duty is not to prove that organic change and racism is going to be solved. The problem with that is that his entire principle analysis rests on saying that there is no societal perception against racism, and therefore that we shouldn't allow people to change their race because this doesn't fall into the idea of bodily autonomy, or that somehow they're going to create a world where this isn't going to be a problem, no thanks, and therefore people can gladly live their life within this particular racial color. Why is this problematic? So we think that in order for any other principle to stand, they need to prove that they're able to achieve a post-racial world where color doesn't matter. Why does organic change not happen, Mr. Speaker? Because we think that the problem is that, unlike the previous progress of race, currently the problem we face is not something that we can legislate against. In the past, the problem was slavery, and the problem was inequality in the workplace. These are all things you can legislate against. The problem is that you're still subject to subtle microaggressions that we have no idea how to legislate against. Like the fact that you always feel excluded because you are a racial minority. Like the fact that you feel like you're less of a citizen because you're stopped more at traffic lights, you're searched more by the police. All of this built into a notion that you are otherized, this built into a notion that you're not a valuable individual or a valuable human being because of your race. That is why we think that organic change is an ingrained problem which isn't able to be solved on their side. Even if they're able to, but apart from that, we also suggest that the harm that they do to racism is minimal and abstract, right? It's unclear as to why one individual choosing to change his race is directly going to cause a lot of other people to be hurt or a lot of racism to be perpetuated. Insofar as they haven't proven that crucial link, that I don't think that there's a problem of racism that they can stand for on their side. Yeah.
The difference between things like changing the size of your boobs and the shape of your face is when we talk about race, it is the biggest determinant of your identity. Because things like gender, things like that, are subsumed under the things people already see like their skin color.
Huh? Why? Why is my race any more part of my identity than my gender or the size of your boobs? That's just unclear. That's just an arbitrary conception that ATENEO places. I don't know why they think they have the right to do this. Okay, second argument. When do we actually stop choices? Look, we need to recognize that we aim to maximize choice as a general rule of thumb. The reason for this is because we think there's a wide number of individuals in society who cannot arbitrarily decide, like what ATENEO wants to do, what the conception of the good life for them is. We think that therefore, because we cannot determine for each and every individual, then the safest thing we can do is to allow each and every individual to find their conception of a good life. When do we stop this? We stop this when there's direct and likely harm to others which is significant. So for example, we don't allow you to drink and drive because it's quite probable you can prove a causal link between your drunk brain and you getting into a car accident. Second, we stop this at the point that you prevent significant definite benefit, like how we force you to pay tax even if you don't want to, because that means that there's definite benefit of a welfare system, etc. Why doesn't this cohere? Because we think that one, there's a speculative causal link as to why your decision to change your race directly means that a lot of people are going to be harmed or a lot more people are going to go around throwing racist epithets. They need to prove this. But second, we think the benefit is also equally speculative. At that point, we think that you're hurting this choice for a very, very small reason. Insofar as that, we don't think this is worth hurting people's identities and hurting people's ability to feel comfortable with themselves. There are two responses. One, they say it didn't matter because bodily autonomy only exists at a point that there's some form of negative societal perception. One, no. We think that if you personally feel that you have the right to live however you want, that's a right that we're happy to stand for. We don't think this matters as to what society thinks of you. But second, we think that there is a societal perception because of all the characteristics normalization of racism that they talked about. And insofar as that, why should you be forced to give up your right to have a good life in order for someone else to do so? That's unclear. We think that insofar as each and every individual deserves to be happy, we don't understand why they're able to stand for this. Okay, but then they said the problem is the choice is coercive. Look, many things are coercive. Like plastic surgery is coercive because it imposes a singular conception of beauty. Religion is coercive because it forces you to do things like fast for a whole month. No analysis as to why this is a bad thing. No analysis as to why this is any different. But we think that blocking this individual's choice is equally limiting, right? And so the question becomes why this individual's choice is fair to be limited in order to help other people. No response. Okay, second, third, why do we think this choice is important to protect dignity? Look, we think that the reason why dignity is important is not the only reason we are different from any other individual is through our choices. And these choices are what ultimately make up our identity. The problem is that insofar as you never opted into your race in the very first place, then it's especially bad for you to be forced to live up to a particular standard and a particular stereotype of how you should behave, like how black people are expected to talk in a certain way or act in a certain way. We don't understand why these stereotypes should be placed on you. That is why we think the only way to protect your dignity as individual human being is to allow you to opt out of this and decide what you want for this. The problem is that societal stereotypes currently limit people's ability to do this, and therefore we think that the individual is only served and he only is able to actualize himself at a point that is able to break out of this. The response to that social expectations only came about because of this particular trend. No, right? Obviously this trend comes out because there is such a social expectation that people want to break out of. And that's why we think that they aren't solving the problem at the point where they ban people from doing this. All they do is put people further entrenched into this problem of social stereotypes. But finally, I suggest that this is important because people need to escape the kind of discrimination that they want to talk about. We need to recognize that this measure is fairly drastic, and therefore the only people who take it are people who have absolutely no other option and feel extraordinarily vulnerable. Like that they have no support structure within the community that they live in, or that because of their race, they feel like they can never be a part of a general community and they don't have the ability to live a dignified life. Insofar as they aren't able to prove a solution to this problem, then it's unclear as to why these people should be used as social battering rams to solve a problem that isn't even likely to be solved in the very first place. Insofar as that, then we think that they have a duty to allow each and every individual to break away from the racism that they are subject to, and that's why we think that they should have the right to decide for themselves who they want to be, what race they want to be, and what kind of expectations they feel they should be conforming to. That is why we think that we're in the best interest of individuals, and insofar as we don't think that individuals have a duty to hurt themselves massively in order for another individual to gain some speculative benefit on ATENEO's side, we're happy to stand in awe.
I'd like to thank the speaker for his speech and call upon the next person. Next speaker, Virgin Partners.
The Leader of Opposition was extremely dismissive of the culture and context we already established from the beginning of this debate. Because ultimately, the entire case of opposition is premised upon free choice and free will for individuals to opt out into a culture wherein they feel their life is better. When we clearly said from the very beginning, social expectations and compromising of choice is already reinforced with the culture wherein you respect the rise of the type of ability for people to change their skin. They are not free when your race is already inferior from the very beginning when you legitimize this culture. They are not free when the narrative of them saying that you can only escape the discrimination that exists in the status quo is only exclusive to changing your skin, is only reinforced in their model, is something that is legitimate. If they concede people want to change their skin for a better life, then we assess that culture from the very beginning was harmful and is only going to be worse when they reinforce that type of narrative. My argument today is going to be very simple. I'm going to say that even in the best case, where people are now comfortable in changing their skin, this culture only legitimizes discrimination from the ones who change their skin to people who stay with their skin culture. We think that is a worse form of people being able to opt into what skin they want anyways. Before that, a few points of rebuttal. Number one, first on the type of POI that they gave, and he brought this up in the rebuttals, right? What about religion? What about transgender individuals that want to be able to change? What about people that go into other surgeries, right? We want to make a distinction upon what the culture culture is right now and why this is different and even more reinforced when we talk about race. Because in this culture of racism, we said, even from the response of from the POI, from my partner, your skin is the largest determinant of that privilege. And there's already an existing pressure to opt out of your skin, right? Yours, like right now, there's no pressure to Christians to switch to Islam or to any other religion, or to feel that I'm inferior because I'm a Christian already right now. There's no pressure for me to change my religion. I have a free choice to do that when I'm 18 years old. Like if I want to resent my parents, I want to opt out into another religion, that's free for me to choose. But we argued specifically under a context wherein your choice was already compromised because of the social expectations that are reinforced. And he even conceded to this. I want a better life because I want to be able to move out of that. Why is that type of calculus even legitimate in the first place? We already said that context was already wrong, and we did not want to support that. That's why this is a debate about regretting, right? Second, on the other arguments, right? He gave us lots of shopping list of arguments: organic change, bodily autonomy, dignity. Regretting the fact that this is a debate about trying to assess whether or not these are mutually exclusive. So we want to assess what is mutually exclusive in our model. Firstly, organic change, the types of microaggressions you talked about, or the ability for people to choose is not mutually exclusive, because microaggressions already happen in this debate and they are only reinforced and are only going to get worse when you do not allow people to change their skin radically. But even if you say bodily autonomy and dignity is a legitimate right, this was already compromised from the very beginning. So it's about comparison. Would you rather prefer a world wherein your choice is already compromised from the very beginning of the culture, or would you rather be reinforced in the culture wherein we have potential to change that culture by saying that, hey, I am legitimate in my own skin, you have no right to say that I should change my skin whatsoever? We think in terms of the debate or what type of negotiation is possible, we think it is far more inclusive for us to say that because you are able to respect the skin that you are in right now, you are able to reject every single ability for them to say, I want to change my skin through this process, right? We think this debate is about assessment of what is the likely scenario, what is the likelihood of what will mostly happen. Will people be free of that choice, or will people not? And we think most cases are done through coercion. Most cases are done through feeling that your skin is already illegitimate, so you have to take that soap, you have to go through that surgery, and you have to try and make that calculus for yourself whether or not I am good in this culture I am right now. Yeah.
Would you regret it if an individual moved out of a majority black neighborhood because it didn't want the association to this particular place?
That's out of the debate again, because like we think that is something that does not have a reinforced culture for you to have an expectation to move out of that, right? This culture says that you have to opt out of your skin as much as possible to get that better life. That's why the narrative in ads already say that you have to switch from your worst life of being black to becoming white, and say where you have that better life. Argument as to why even in their best case where you are now comfortable in changing, this culture legitimizes discrimination from the ones who change skin to people who stay with their skin culture. And I want to fit this argument into debate by asking a simple question. How do we resolve racism as much as possible, or minimize racism to the extent? And I want to co-opt the goal that opposition gave to us. Their goal was to say that color must mean nothing. Color should not matter, and color should not be a reinforcing factor for me to say that I should stay in this skin or I should not, right? We think that this is a fair distinction upon what you should try and do. How do we best do that in our model? On their world, they say that color matters when you change your skin. Color matters when you are born into your skin and you have to change to white. Color matters when you are an African individual in an African community and most of your privileged friends are white, and you can only be with the cool kids of that culture when you are white, or when you try and reduce the tan on your skin, reduce the ability for you to feel that you are within the rest of your family or that you are black. We think that is a culture that already says that color does matter. And if they concede that is the goal of this debate, we would rather prefer a world wherein you do not have that culture reinforcing it to you all the time. And again, this is a debate about the rise in that culture. So the rise is bombarded against you. It happens all the time. You are reinforced in that culture everywhere you go, be it from your ads, be it from the community, or even when you assess it for yourself, right? When you look at yourself in the mirror and think that you are a legitimate culture. So in their best case, when someone changes their skin, we think it's still bad for them, because that person has the legitimacy to say that color matters, therefore you should change too. That color matters, therefore everyone should change their skin color because white is the only way to go. It is not a free choice, because color will always matter in a world wherein their standard of solving racism is subsuming to the standard of the majority, subsuming to the standard that white still will always be the standard, and changing your color is the only way to do that. The only way to resolve that problem is sticking with the status quo, by saying that we reject the culture wherein you will be able to try and change your color, or reject the culture wherein people will force you to do such, or say that it is a better life, or equate that narrative as escaping discrimination. Because the only way to escape discrimination is to be free from that same discrimination and be comfortable in your own skin, not trying to change that initially, or being able to try and opt into another culture. For all these and more, because we're still the side that is able to tackle what context is more realistic and what context is more likely, I am very proud to propose.
Thank you very much for this speech. Continue the debate about context.
We think at the end of the day, the fundamental problem and the failing on-site government is that they've never proven to us an exclusive difference. Why changing your skin color is so different from changing every other thing in your world. Changing your gender, moving house, changing your religion. They've never proven to us this exclusive difference, and as long as we prove that it's no different from every other thing, we think we take today's debate. But more importantly, we would like to clarify that the angle on-site opposition today was never to solve discrimination, because we recognize on both sides that discrimination is something that's extremely hard to solve. And this was something conceded and accepted on-site government. The problem is, insofar as people are locked into their cultures and locked into their skin colors, who can best help them escape discrimination and feel better about themselves? We think we do it better on-site opposition. But let's talk about the exclusive difference first, right? They told us it's fundamentally different from, say, gender. Firstly, we think that how is race-based discrimination different from gender-based discrimination? I think it's similar on a scale where people are discriminated based on arbitrary factors that they cannot change about themselves, something they've never once proven to us why it's different. But more importantly, we give you examples in LO about things like plastic surgery, right? There's perhaps social constructs of being ugly and being beautiful, and how this will change you, how you can change your religion, perhaps a person who is discriminated as a Christian chooses to change his religion, right? They've never once proven to us. The only thing they try to push forward is that race is the biggest determinant. A few responses, right? Number one, we think it's ultimately a societal construct as morally arbitrary. They can never choose your race, and something that society decides to construct. And insofar as this, we think it's extremely harmful. But if they want to say that race is the biggest determinant, we think it's even more harmful when you cannot change such a large part of your identity, right? Insofar as this is the thing that plagues you every single day of your life, and you're judged by every single individual, we think it's especially important to be able to change your race through these mechanisms. Two things I want to examine today. Firstly, whether their choices are legitimate, and secondly, how we best dignify people. Firstly, whether the choices are legitimate, right? The only argument coming on site government was this, right? That's coercive because the media chooses to portray beauty standards and chooses to say that certain, you need to be whiter. A few responses, right? Number one, we think it's regrettable if it's media standards, but however, we need to recognize that media standards exist all the time. We recognize that at best, right, all choices are coercive on their side. The difference is, we think that this is no different from every other coercive choice you make. It's especially important because race is such a large part of your identity. But more importantly, we think that it ultimately is a rational choice, and is a choice that people are able to make, right? Given this is such a large part and such a large, drastic change where you have undergo procedures to do this, right? And no thank you. We think it's a rational choice because you're the one who made that choice to go and undergo such a drastic change. They've never proven to us why this ultimately is irrational, no. But more importantly, the next argument coming from their side was this, right? That you internalize discrimination, and this is bad because people need to feel comfortable in their own skins. The problem here is this, right? That I won't undergo a procedure if I already feel comfortable in my own skin. I obviously tried very hard to feel comfortable in my own skin. The problem here, no thank you sir, is when people are able to feel comfortable in their own skin, we think we need to give like this clause and this like mechanism for people to feel comfortable in their own skins. We don't think that they solve this. But more importantly, my LO brought you arguments about how it's bad to make these people social battering rams, right? For the greater good of society. They never wanted to deal with this. We think this is harmful because ultimately we best ensure happiness and like a best like fulfilling life for these individuals. Something they never once dealt with. But second issue, right, on how we best dignify people. A few arguments that my LO brought up they never wanted to deal with. We tell you that we best allow dignity, right? Because these are individuals who don't face dignity on a daily basis when they're judged by their race. When we allow them to change their race, we allow them to feel better about themselves, we allow them to feel agency and control over their lives, we think we best allow dignity. They've never once dealt with this. But more importantly, the important part of the argument was this, right? That individuals never get a choice to opt into the race. And this is harmful when you are not arguing moments. It's harmful when you don't get the ability to opt in and side government like doesn't give them the opt-out clause to feel better about themselves. Before that, yes.
Surgeries that alter your skin are not accessible to a lot of blind individuals because of cost. Are you okay with someone who went through race-altering surgery being more privileged than someone that cannot?
So we thought that ultimately, right, this characterization is unrealistic. Let's think about it, right? If you're a privileged black individual, you often don't face the kind of persecution that like the very poor black individuals face, right? So the more realistic characterization is the very vulnerable group of minorities who often have to escape their race. We think that if you're talking about like the privileged minority, we don't think that they are the people who often face persecution because they're like the very special group of people. So we don't think this is realistic characterization. But at best, we think that we will try to help. We don't think that this is the case, right? But let's move on, right? We tell you that how the fact that race is morally arbitrary is bad because you don't opt into race. And this is similar with all other problems in the birth lottery where you cannot choose, which is why we give individuals as much agency as possible to like change their fates and like not be locked by the birth lottery, right? But this is where I bring you extension material, right? How it's especially bad when you force individuals to cohere into their own racial like stereotypes, right? The problem here is this, right? Where individuals face expectations because of like racial stereotypes and stereotypes placed on like the whole racial group, right? Where they lose their identity because they're only seen, say, as a black person. The problem here is this, right? That I may be Chinese, but I may be brought up in a very English and a very like Western like family, right? The problem here is when I lose my identity as an individual because I'm only seen as a Chinese person. If I want to change my race, I think that is fundamentally legitimate. I should be allowed to do this. But more importantly, they try to tell us about how we legitimize discrimination. We think that number one, right, the first response that we think that this is marginal at best because a single person changing his race won't affect discrimination as a whole, won't better it, won't worsen it. But more importantly, we need to recognize that no individual can solve discrimination. This is something that they consider on their side, right? We agree that discrimination already exists. The problem here is who can solve it better. Let me give you the comparative, right? If they try to paint to us that discrimination is so harmful, we think it's fundamentally worse when they choose to lock individuals into this cycle of discrimination, right? Because when I can never leave this cycle of discrimination and I'm never given an opt-out clause, it's fundamentally more harmful and we hurt more individuals on their side. What's the comparative on our side? We think that at least, right, even if we accept that discrimination is so fundamentally harmful and we can never do anything to change discrimination or better it to a large extent, we allow individuals to leave this cycle of discrimination and feel better about themselves as individuals. This is fundamentally important because we think that each individual should be protected and should never be used as a social battering ram. But even if we agree that there's like some form of coercion, we think it's better on our side, right? Because we still help these individuals we help these individuals to a large extent. What was the characterization that my LO brought up to you that was extremely realistic that you never wanted to deal with, right? We give you the characterization and contextualization of microaggression, where it's very difficult to solve because it's so subtle. This kind of racism is so subtle, right? They never wanted to deal with this like subtle form of discrimination that individuals face that's very difficult to like legislate. For all these reasons, I've proven to you, number one, why this choice is fundamentally a legitimate one, and secondly, if we cannot like solve discrimination, at best we allow individuals to leave this cycle of discrimination. For all these reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for the speech. Over the next speaker, the government
opposition side needs to see that they cannot generalize this debate to a body augmentation debate in general. Because in the society we move in, a white Muslim will be treated better than a black Muslim. That's why when DLO attempts to downplay the role of race in this debate by saying that it doesn't really matter in the long run, she contradicts their leader of the opposition who says they'd like to give people the opportunity to opt out when she herself says that it won't cause much an effect to society, but their principle is you want to give people the opportunity to opt out. This shows you just exactly how contradictory their case can be, and that tension is something that's going to exist regardless. Because we have to understand that discrimination based on skin in society is something that intersects with other forms of discrimination and worsens it. So that's why a black Muslim will always receive more inhumane treatment than a white Muslim. I want to talk about 3 questions to justify this Asian Championship for government. Firstly, is it justified to regret the choice of people changing their skin in order to feel happy? They said that we have no right to arbitrate where the people will feel happier coming from their side as well. The response to that is quite simple. Firstly, we have no right. Firstly, it's not a policy. It's not a policy debate. So we're not dictating this particular choice on them. But we are willing to bite the bullet and go hardline and say that even if we are saying that this choice is regrettable, their side never engage how the calculus of these individuals who opt in these types of procedures work. These are individuals who will feel self-loathed because society creates this narrative that for you to get out of that situation, you have to subscribe to the standards of the privileged majority. So that in themselves cast a shadow of doubt of just exactly how rational and in agency and in control of these people are with the decisions they make, given that you formulate it under an oppressive society where this culture that dictates that you have to change your skin color in order to be happy is something that they are perfectly fine with supporting. This is where we clashed and preempted their idea of choice, when we ultimately questioned just how genuine that choice of trying to be happy is. We said that the exclusive nuance to the rise of these products is because that this rise is something coercive. Coercive to the extent where people in your community will tell you to use glutathione soap in order to feel like you are more accepted, because in order to feel like that makes you more beautiful. So that in itself casts a shadow of doubt of this idea that no, it's not really not influential. It is. It's something permissive even with those cultures when people begin to internalize the oppression they face. But this is where we have to talk about the next thing they say, on how we have to give them ability to opt out of these situations they live in. Again, I'd like to point out the blatant contradiction the DLO gives to her LO, when she essentially tries to devalue just how important and big these things are when you opt out of your race, when you say that it doesn't really matter. But firstly, what we say to that is that idea and that notion should not even exist to begin with. And so the second level of response is that even if that happens, the solution is not to make them adapt to the standards of what society dictates is good, but rather to make people feel more tolerant and accepting towards them. And that's exactly what they are depriving of coming from their side. So this is where we have to arbitrate this issue. We think that it's not fair for them to be able to arbitrate and say it's not going to be fair for the individuals because it's their personal choice, when we find it completely fine to justify coming from our side. Next question we want to address. Is changing your skin color different from any other things that augment your body? We said, coming from our side, things like religion are subsumed under your skin color because of the fact that these types of discrimination intersects, and usually people place most importance on your skin color. That's why a black Muslim will always receive not as good treatment in comparison to a white Muslim. Their response of this idea that they want to opt out already because they already feel discomfort, we don't necessarily think that engages our characterization, because if they use examples such as allowing people to opt out in other situations, that does not engage the argument at all. So that's why when we take a look at this issue of characterization, we have proven to you the clear delineation and nuance of why this debate is talking about the rise of skin alteration products and not just any other effort to augment your body. So on this second issue, it is going to be clear that government side takes it. Yes, sir.
I think it is clear that a black woman is going to face more discrimination than a black man. Why would your side stop a sex change operation?
We're not stopping her sex change operation. I don't understand why you're misrepresenting us. This debate is about things like skin operation products. We're talking about because these things intersect with other forms of discrimination, and that's what we think the nuance is coming from our side as well. So the last question in this debate we have to answer is, where is racism worsened? We said that discrimination happens even with the people from that race who opt out, meaning this shows you the potential harm that this choice that they allow that's going to happen. That the people themselves who face discrimination when they opt out are the very people who marginalize people in the same race they belong and tell them to opt out. Just take that bleaching surgery. Just use this product so that you will be happier. This is because it shows you the harm coming from our side. When you preserve the idea of things like the white privilege, when people associate things like better treatment on the basis of your skin color, that is exactly the marginal harm we show you consistently coming from our side. But when they tell us that it's really not that, it's not, you have to standard society have imposed on you. We think it's not a testament of dignity. It is a testament that you have internalized your oppression because you know that you will never get out of that situation. So this is where we have to answer the question. We think racism is something worsened on your side once you think that the solution for people no longer feeling unhappy is that if they opt out of the skin they have. We think that type of rhetoric is something pernicious, and that is something that's never going to solve racism. And for all those reasons and more, hopefully, second time's a charm.
Thank you very much for that speech. So, what final speaker from the opposition side?
GovWhip tried to point out very false contradictions in our case. It wasn't when you didn't say that race is not important. That's not what she said. She said that some people just don't think race is important to their identity. I may be a rich person, I may be a woman, but I don't feel that being Chinese is the most important part of our identity. The problem in status quo is that race is perceived as being important to your identity. That is the problem. There was no contradiction there. So at the point to which ATENEO tries to point out very false contradictions, which are quite simple to understand, arguments quite simple to understand, we think they've lost this debate. I'm going to talk to you about two things. First, I'm going to talk about discrimination. Second, identity. First, discrimination. They say you shouldn't change your race because it legitimizes discrimination. Here's the thing, right? This debate was not about which side legitimizes discrimination more, because we told you right from LO that neither side, on both sides, discrimination exists. The more nuanced question in this debate is how can we allow individuals to actualize themselves and better improve their own welfare at the point that discrimination happens on both ends. These guys say that by individuals opting into this, choosing to change their own race, you internalize the discrimination. Thank you. That you know that at least on their side, you are able to feel more comfortable being black. Here's the thing, right? They haven't really proven why one individual staying black means that, you are more comfortable being black to begin with. We think at best this benefit is very like airy-fairy, right? Like you feel more comfortable in being black. But here's the thing, right? We don't think, but why don't you allow people to, why do we think that this discrimination is so terrible? Because let's take them the highest. They say that discrimination is bad. Fine. In circumstances whereby discrimination is terrible, like for instance, you are being denied a job because you're black. You are being stopped by the police more because you're black. We suggest that that's the circumstances in which we're very happy to support a world where we're happy for people to leave and opt out of this discrimination to begin with. Why is it important to prioritize the individual, especially in these circumstances? No, thank you. Here's the thing, right? Number one, we suggest that discrimination is unfair because it robs you of dignity and robs you of choices. Being denied a job means you're robbed of dignity to provide for food for your family. Here's the thing, we think it's even more morally abhorrent to deny a person who's robbed of dignity and choice and agency in every aspect of his life this aspect as well. We think it's the black people, the black people who are most robbed of dignity in status quo, and we think it's even more morally abhorrent to rob them of dignity even further by denying them the ability to opt out of this kind of discrimination to begin with.
Secondly, these guys cannot prove any definitive benefit, because in the best case scenario, this benefit is extremely marginal, right? That more people are more able to feel comfortable in their own skin. But the cost to individuals is huge. The cost to individuals, taking that at the best case scenario, that discrimination is so harmful, means that you are unable to provide for a family because you're denied jobs. Means that you are completely humiliated in front of your children because you're being stopped by a policeman for being black. If these are the costs, Mr. Speaker, then we don't think it's right to treat individuals as social battering rams simply to achieve some kind of very nebulous, airy-fairy benefit. So given that the benefits are so marginal, but the harms to individuals are so great, we suggest that it's the duty, of social movements to actually prioritize the rights of the individuals to begin with. Because we recognize that a black person is not a social battering ram for the entire black movement. A black person also should enjoy things like rights, like joy, like privilege, like autonomy, agency that other white people enjoy in the status quo. We don't think that it's right for the black rights movement to rob him of this choice and agency even further. That's why we think that in circumstances, and we've proven to you that since discrimination is something that's going to be a wash, here's the thing, right? At the best, the benefit on their side is marginal. We'd rather prioritize individuals and allow individuals to opt out of this terrible discrimination. Go ahead.
Isn't it exactly the rise of this culture that associates dignity with the color you have and not your intrinsic worth as a human being?
Here's the thing, right? You guys don't really stop that, given there are still things such as subtle microaggressions that happen on both sides. That's why we think that if individuals feel better because they are perceived as, because people see them and treat them as a white person, we're very happy to allow them this kind of dignity and allow them to enjoy these kinds of things to begin with. Second, let's talk about identity. Here's the argument we gave you in LO that these guys have not responded to. We suggested that choice is important. Why? Firstly, we suggested that race does not determine every aspect of your life. Simply because you're brought up, simply because you're a black person does not mean you're expected to behave in a black, what society expects of a black person. We also told you that things such as race are extremely arbitrary because we allow you to change every other aspect of your identity, such as your hometown, your job, your religion, but we don't allow you to change your race. We lock individuals to their race. We don't think that's important to begin with. Given that people don't even identify as their race to begin with, we think we're happy for that. We stand for a world whereby people actually change this. Their response was that things like religion is different. We don't think we really a clear delineation as to why religion is particularly different. But let me tell you why it's not, right? Because here's the thing, you can also face discrimination because of your religion. In countries such as the Middle East, you're being discriminated because you're being Christian, because you're born a Christian. So here's the thing, right? Given that there are certain circumstances whereby religion is the reason you're being discriminated, we don't think we heard a very straight response from these guys as to why we wouldn't allow individuals to actually opt out of this religion to begin with. So no clear response from these guys. But more importantly, these guys try to throw shit on our principle, right? By saying that, but it's a coercive choice. But here's the thing, we think it's a wash because all choices are fundamentally coercive. On your side, your choice to stay as a black person is also coercive because of these guys' vote. So here's the thing, right? You say that coercive choice is bad. It also suggests that things such as personal autonomy are actually important. So given that things like coercion are a wash, we don't think that this is a very unique argument coming from these guys. Next thing they say, this is an irrational choice. But once again, all choices are irrational to begin with, right? But we think it's really morally abhorrent to say that these are irrational choices. What if discrimination is so bad? What if you are denied opportunities every stage of your life because you're a certain race? We don't think that these are things that are completely irrational because the harms felt by individuals are extremely great. Then they say in GovT, but it's a matter of privilege, right? Maybe only rich black guys can opt into this. But this fails to deal with Wernie's response to this entire POI. That it's not the rich black guy who feels most hurt by discrimination. It's often the poor person to begin with. So we don't really see how this idea that it's only privileged black people want to opt out of this makes any sense to begin with. But more importantly, here's the analysis from 1E and LO that these guys have not dealt with. That on their side, they essentialize many people in these minorities because there's a certain expectation to behave in a certain way. For instance, individuals may not actually behave like a stereotypical black person because there are many cultural reasons or cultural historical reasons why, for instance, a black person may go out because they are born more privileged, for instance, they don't really behave like a stereotypical black person. But the point to which the person does not identify as white because he was never brought up as does not identify as black because he was not brought up as a stereotypical black person. These guys essentialize these people and lock them into their own race, even though their race does not correlate to their identity or what society perceives as their own identity. And we think it's terrible, right? We think it's terrible because we think the last thing the black rights movement wants to do is to essentialize people. Essentialize the most vulnerable of people when they don't have support structures either in the black community or the white community. Here's the thing, right? Since neither side can solve discrimination, we need to prioritize individuals and the ability to opt out of this discrimination. This is why SDDP 1 was so proud to be in ASDC, and we're very, very proud to oppose.
right from the start of this debate, we told you that there were a wide number of things that we allow people to do with their bodies, like, or their individual, like change your religion and like change the way you look. Their response down the line was, but it doesn't matter, we are too scared to deal with it, so let's just pretend it didn't exist. Here's the problem, right? The point of the POI, which they didn't ever want to pick a side to, is that you allow people to change from your religion. That's very contradictory, because we told you that things like religion and gender were every bit as harmful to your identity as race. So, and like, I think it's awful, and three guys on that side told Wen-Yi that it's not very important that she's a woman and she's not actually very badly discriminated. Guys, it's quite awful. Insofar as that, I think that like we need to recognize that it will be principally consistent for them to ban religion as well. But at the point that they wanted to ban you from changing your religion and changing your gender, then they become like Singapore, right? They become a nanny state that doesn't allow people to do what they want. The problem is that in this specific scenario, you're born into this problem, and there's no way you can break. Oh shit, I'm being live streamed. There's no way that you can break out of it. And the problem with this is that it means that they're not going to allow people to do what they want to do with their bodies, and we think that is awful, and that's not something we can principally stand for. So I'm going to tell you why we think we break down the argument that comes from ATENEO, and therefore we beat the only ATENEO team we haven't beaten in this competition. Here's their argument. You increase discrimination, and therefore you cannot do this. That's really what all three speeches told us. So the first question, I guess, is whether they solve discrimination. Because if they wanted to say that we hurt discrimination, they need to prove that they solve it in order for the cost that people bear due to discrimination to be worth it. That's the argument I gave all the way from leader opposition. Why don't they solve it? Because we told you down the bench that you simply cannot solve microaggression, and therefore you are subjecting people to the kind of harms that are significant. Because microaggression is not something that can be like legislated against, and it's something that's been deeply rooted in our societies for generations and generations. Their response was that, but you legitimize discrimination. Okay, I'm not sure why there's a big difference between a racial epithet being principally legitimate and principally illegitimate. I think that the racial epithet is the same. I think that the harm caused is the same, and therefore I don't think there's a practical difference that they can stand for. Therefore, insofar as they don't solve discrimination, I don't understand why it's fair for them to say that they should be able to similarly make people like stuck within the race that they were born into. So we don't think they solve discrimination. But even if you solve discrimination, so what? Here's the thing. At the point that they tell us racial discrimination is really, really, really bad, then that means that we think that then the worse that they make it, and the more they say that race is the only part of your identity that matters, then all the more you need to be able to change it in order to feel like a human being that's not born into like and locked into whatever you happen to be born as. That's why we think that it's all the more important that you need to change. And the more they characterize that your life now is really, really hell, and that's why there's impetus for us to regret this, then that means that all the more it's reasonable that you're suffering so much discrimination, they're probably making a fair choice at the point that you want to change this. That's why we think that their own argumentation works against their particular principle. But here's the thing, right? We told you that like coercion and stuff like that are just a wash because we think that coercion exists anyway. All the way from my first opposition speech, this is something we told you. So I guess the question, therefore, is why individuals have a duty to solve the problems of other individuals, and why individuals cannot solve their own problems. Here's the thing. I told you right from the start the reason why we think individuals should be given choices. We told you that it's important to your particular identity. We told you why it's important for you to not be bound to this kind of racial harm and the kind of humiliation that you suffer from microaggression on a daily basis. These three guys had no argument whatsoever telling you why principally it was important that an individual was bound to help other individuals. Insofar as that, then I think the point is this, that insofar as individuals should be able to make choices that determine what is best for them, and insofar as we don't think they're able to prove a significant harm that my choice to change my skin color causes to other individuals, then we're very happy to take this championship.
Thank you very much for the points. I welcome final speaker now, government speaker.
Just because the context of racism exists doesn't mean this debate is about opting out of their skin and being free from racism, or being restricted to your skin and being full of racism all the time. We said specifically, this culture reinforces the culture to the point that it compromises the ability for you to choose and the ability for you to opt out of that same racism in the first place. And from the very beginning, it was already an unfree choice, and that for that reason, it was already illegitimate. There are two things I'm going to look at in this speech. We're going to look at responses and characterizations to different actors, and number two, what exactly is the mutually exclusive principle that will exist on either model. Number one, on responses and characterization. Firstly, we wanted to make it very clear that this debate was about responding to different contexts. We did not say this debate was about solving discrimination in totality. We said this debate was about, given a discrimination, a culture of discrimination, how do you minimize it as much as possible, whether you reinforce it or whether you're able to try as much as possible to reject that culture in the very beginning, because we are accusing them of being unnuanced to the point that they just made this debate about opting out of anything in general rather than talking about race specifically and the different types of objections that they have right now. This is how they wanted to view the debate, right? They wanted to view this debate by saying that this is a choice that, number one, doesn't affect all of discrimination because it's a personal choice that is free and that saves people from racism because it is able to say that color does not matter. Therefore, it's nothing different from being ugly, nothing different from changing your religion, or the like. Why is this an unfair characterization from the very beginning? Ultimately, we say that it neglects the context of how we said it was coercive from personal, interpersonal, and communal relationships. And even in their model, even a response to the POI coming from the deputy already conceded that it needed to affect others for it to be an effective policy or for an effective culture that tried and influence other individuals, because lots and more people needed to opt into the culture of trying to change their skin if they wanted to save themselves from that racism, right? They even said their policy or their culture was targeted towards vulnerable communities and not just about the privileged. So even in that fact, we said very simply that you do not legitimize that culture by saying that vulnerable communities should always change their skin, but you needed to be able to analyze that because they are vulnerable, they cannot be, their choice cannot be compromised because of that same type of discrimination. Because they cannot afford a surgery, for example, does it mean that they should be restricted to their skin all the time? That's the comparative of what free choices are given to all of them in their model. We said very clearly, race has to matter because that is how they perceive how the world is possible. That's why it's different from religion, because it is even more coercive in a world wherein you respect and legitimize that culture, wherein you tolerate it and culminate it to the point that it's targeted towards those vulnerable communities. That's why even in this case, whether or not all choices are coercive or not, this debate was about the legitimacy of that coercion from the very beginning on whether that choice was fine. We say very simply, we have to ask what is the likely scenario and what is the comparative. And if they concede that it is have to always have a better life as the narrative, then we can say very much that this is a harmful dominant culture to get that better life. And we wanted to say that that choice was illegitimate, and we wanted to try and say as much as possible we didn't want people to make that calculus from the very beginning. So when we ask the question, does color matter? Yes, it does in their world where they make it matter and force it to matter when they reinforce the culture as much as possible. Secondly, what is the mutually exclusive principle? And let's look at their best case. The world that they wanted was one with choice to opt for a better world. First and foremost, we co-opted this from the very beginning in terms of the timeline, wherein we wanted people to not live in a culture where it was already only reinforced and only made worse. But secondly, we wanted to ask, why is it legitimate for one person to make that free choice in exchange for an embedded culture for all of a community to say that it is bad to remain in your culture? We wanted to say that in their best case, if one person can change their culture, it only legitimizes that rhetoric for him to influence everyone in that same culture to change their skin. We did not want that to be the comparative as much as possible. We said that freedom is only restricted in a world where that culture is legitimized. I am very proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the speakers and the host.